Thanks, Sebastian, for being on this podcast. Before we begin, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, sure, Janine. My name is Sebastian Flores. I work at UPlanner as Chief Data Officer, and I'm part of Streamlit programs of Creator. And I love to do random Python stuff, especially creating different apps and whatnot.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I believe we actually met in person recently at PyCon, like during in June, in Pittsburgh. Yeah, it was like amazing to finally meet you in person, and we actually recorded like two videos, which kind of aired on the Streamlit YouTube channel. And I think the audience really loved your tips for learning Python.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, and so we're actually like doing a deeper dive. So we're creating this podcast as kind of like an extension of the YouTube Shorts, which was pretty much like in a minute or so. Yeah, so perhaps we could start with kind of like what do you do on a day to day basis, and how does Python fit uh into your
Sure.
work?
Do you mind if I take a different route and
Mhm,
I talk a little bit of what Python
mhm.
meant to me and what happened after the Python conference? Because I think
Okay.
there are some nice stories over there.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Okay, so I spent like 3 months creating the talk for the PyCon US because
Hmm.
for me, giving a talk in another language in like the main PyCon conference was a huge like milestone in
Hmm.
my career. So I really sat down and prepared everything as much as I could, and I gave the talk, and I had awesome feedback from the audience. Of course, lots of things that after I realized could have been different. And I took that talk and I translated back
Hmm.
to Spanish,
Hmm.
and I have been presenting that talk into different setups.
Hmm.
So, first of all, I presented this talk on Python Chile meetup. So that was sort of the first raw translation. Then one mining company, like the mining industry in Chile is very big and has a lot of money. So one of these companies hired me to give sort of the same talk I give for free on PyCon,
Hmm.
but paid
Hmm.
because they wanted to train some data scientists on what is data storytelling. And
Hmm.
that was, really surprising to me that something that I created out of love and fun could be also like a product, like a service I could provide to companies. And later I took that talk and I also gave it in a big event in Latin America, which
Hmm.
is Nerviarla, which is like an event of thousands of people attending online and in person in Argentina. And it has been really surprising how this topic of data storytelling that
Hmm.
uh, I just sort of found out and started learning a year or a bit more ago has becoming a large part of what I speak and develop. And very recently, I also took this talk and I gave it at my company just to help, you know, teaching and educating the data scientists and data engineers and pretty much everyone on how important it is to know how to communicate over data and do good presentations. So it's been quite a journey since the PyCon US.
Right. And I remember like we were actually like when I entered the room was filled, like it's a very big room. I was like toward the back of the room. And yeah, I mean there's a lot of people who found value in what you shared during your talk. And you did mention about some of the cool components that you've created. And I think you've also mentioned about like like delivering the talk in an app, like
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that was very fun to do, and I think that's sort of the beauty of Streamlit, that it's so flexible that you can use it as a tool for pretty much anything you can think of. It's really really flexible. You have all these components, and you can do extensions, and it's for me, it's really a tool I would love to have had like 20 years ago when I was in studying in the university, because there's so many things that you can build off. And for me, learning is doing things, not just, uh, just passive learning.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean, back when I was also learning Python, I think the only thing that we had was kind of like the CLI.
Yeah,
So we were able to, I was able to, like create a simple command line program, and then it accepts your name. It'll via the prompt in the command
yeah,
line, and it kind of spits back the name that you provided. So that was pretty cool, and then kind of like seeing it evolve, like with Jupyter coming out, and then you're able to interactively see your code, and then the next iteration was like Streamlit, which allows you to create a shareable um, Python apps. That was pretty cool.
yeah, exactly. I think that the beauty is that you have more powerful tools, but they're even easier to use than the original tools we had a couple of years ago. Like building a small website with Django, it's
Hmm.
an overkill if you just want to do, just to run some computer science code on the background.
Right, right. And I believe I came to know you from your work that you shared on Twitter. I think you created this component. Is it Streamlit book?
Yeah,
Right, where you kind of allow us to kind of like read a book, but then in the app, and then it's very interactive, right? Yeah, like you could move the slider widget, and then you get to see kind of like explanation. I think you were teaching a concept in data science or machine learning, and then yeah, in the app. Would you like to maybe go into depth into that?
yeah, I think that was a library I created just to help myself with some apps I was doing, and sort of all this. I had this code that I should be reusing, which is one of the things that I love to do, like taking code I have on different apps and try to generalize and to abstract a little how things work. And this was way before we had multi-paging on
Hmm.
the Streamlit. So uh, presenting different pages was something that was hard at the beginning. And this helped me to have different pages and to being able to change the content easily, without having to do different stuff. So the idea was to save your content into different files, which serve as pages, and to display that dynamically, which is sort of what we're doing now in Streamlit, but
Hmm.
back then was very convenient. And uh, again, that was something I could not have done just by myself. There
Hmm.
were several components of different people in the community I just hacked together and end up producing this.
Hmm.
And it was, again, very fun to do. And you never know what you built, who's
Hmm.
gonna end up using it. I get some random emails from time to time just to adjust some parameter or something that's broken on the library, and might be someone that's using that library for teaching in a course, or deploying something that's uh, of importance to them. So it's really interesting to see that, same as I profit from what others have built, it happens the same to things that I'm building.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's truly transformational, like seeing tools that allows you to communicate data in a more effective way, rather than kind of like a static, like a static plot, but then like something that's interactive, that will be able to kind of like convey, like complex topics in a way where learners could, interact with widgets, slide some input parameters, and then see how that affects like the concept that you're explaining.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the key part of learning. Learning should not be passive, and you should not take as face value something that someone is giving you. Like this function with these values produce this result.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you tell me, I'm gonna forget in a couple of minutes. But if I can play around and see how the different parameters affect the function, and plot stuff, and explore and interact, it's
Mm-hmm.
gonna be much fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be more fun and a better learning experience.
Mm-hmm. Right. You did mention about like how you also gave talk at PyCon Chile, and I believe like when we were meeting in person, you also like introduced me to fellow Pythonistas
Yeah.
in Latin America, and also in the Spanish community as well. Could you elaborate like more into like how um, into like Python in Spanish communities and how you're playing a part there?
Yeah, sure. So I think we Latin America has evolved into strong Python communities in the different countries, and while we have the PyCon Chile event, the PyCon Argentina event, PyCon Colombia, PyCon Brazil, and every country has its own main event and community. What I have seen is that the geographical borders are just for the countries, and if you apply as a Chilean to another conference, it's about what you're teaching, and I love that we can share knowledge, and it's not like specific to countries and nationalities. And I think these conferences are becoming larger and more sort of standard. A couple of years ago, there were small conferences where just people who were deeply involved in Python ended up attending.
Mhm.
And right now, you can see from people that are just starting, that are related but not strongly to the language, participating and even giving talks. And I think that's beneficial to everyone. And I think that's part of what makes the Python community so great, that it welcomes everyone who wants to participate and learn or share something.
Mhm.
Uh,
Right. And like a common recurring theme that I see with like during PyCon was the diverse background of people coming into Python. I see like people coming from finance, from education, from biology, um, and then embracing Python is kind of like a means, like it's kind of like a common language where people come to automate things and get things done faster, more efficient. And yeah, I mean the community is very welcoming, and yeah, get to share experiences and learn from each other. Yeah, that was like a very cool experience.
yeah, it's very surprising that you can use Python for so many different things. When I went to my first PyCon,
Mhm.
I thought all the conferences and talks were gonna be about Python and data and computer science. And actually, there were like great talks on, as you mentioned, finance and biology, astrology, but also web development and web apps for smartphone. And there's so much that we don't know. And I think that's great, because no one can claim that knows everything about Python, and that sort of put us on the same ground, that we're all just learners.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. That's pretty much kind of like another mindset. Kind of like when we, like for someone from a non-technical background, like embracing Python. I think that this is kind of like a big threshold. Taking that first step to, to have a mindset of becoming a beginner again, no matter what experience you have in another field, but pretty much like starting from scratch, from zero, and kind of like making errors, making failing a lot of times. And I remember, like when I first started coding in C, there's a lot of there's a steep learning curve there. and actually it kind of clicked, after a couple of tries, before actually coding in Python. Um, yeah, would you like to share your experiences learning Python for the first time? What was it like?
Sure. So I studied a long time ago, maybe 20, 25 years, when I was on my first degree at university here in Chile. And we learned Pascal, which is another language that probably nobody knows by now. And uh, I studied mathematics, so we use mostly MATLAB. And I hate MATLAB because it was expensive and you had to use like a non-paid versions, and it was always like tricky. And then for my first job, the client demanded that we use Python and NumPy instead of MATLAB, because that was free and that was something that they could use.
Mhm.
And it was amazing that we could switch all the code from MATLAB to Python and NumPy in just a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
And from then on, there was no turning back because it was so convenient. Things kept improving steadily with each upgrade of Python and NumPy.
Mhm.
And that was a very lucky move. It was all serendipity. But 20 years later, I think it was like something key on my career. And what I always say is that for me, Python is a language that fits very well how I think. I can express myself in terms of the algorithms and the structures in a very clean way, and I don't have to overthink or simplify in
Mhm.
order to get the things that I want to do. So for me, it's just like an extension of thinking, but
Mhm.
into code.
Oh, nice. That's a very great way of putting it. Kind of like how, um, like how programming languages affects how you think.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, what I would think that has changed in the
mhm.
last couple of years is how AI and the software that uses AI to suggest code has been changing. And before, I think I coded a little bit more experimentally. So
Mhm.
sort of, I had a piece of code, and then I just use IPython and interactively
Mhm.
develop the code that I needed. And now it's more sort of put a lot of comments on what the code is, what are
Mhm.
the columns of the data frames or the elements or the objects that I'm using, like
Mhm.
sort of you document what you want to end up doing.
Mhm.
You put a lot of effort into defining what you need to do. And from that point on, the suggestions on the code are very spot on. So I
Mhm.
think that is a very interesting approach, in the sense that it builds a virtuous
Mhm.
cycle, in the terms that your code end up being more documented,
Mhm.
with the better comments, because you know that will help you in the future, but also the suggestions that you're getting to improve the code.
Mhm.
So I think that's one good attribution of AI into coding.
Mhm.
Um, and hope it keeps growing and developing better tools.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like when AI started rolling out, like like in a massive way, to a wider audience, like I think like recently, like in the last year or two, people were seeing headlines like AI will take over our jobs, and what are your stance on that?
It's hard to tell, because I think that no matter what we say, we're gonna be wrong,
Mhm.
because things are changing so fast and in unexpected ways.
Mhm.
Um, as I mentioned, doing stuff requires to define what you need to do. AI by itself, it's not going to build anything. And let me put just one dumb example. I like to learn songs for ukulele, and I wanted to build an app that displayed the chords I need to play on the uke and all the lyrics, and it just show the lyrics flowing on my screen, because I don't want to see a small sheet of paper where I get lost. And just defining what needs to be done and just to like decompose the process took a lot of time. Like solving the small pieces of the puzzle, it's easy, but it really needs to define the problem. So you have two things. One is the intent, they wanted to do something, like thinking into, I'm gonna build this. AI is never gonna have that intention. It's just gonna be one tool, but it's not gonna build anything by itself, because it does not know what needs to be built, what's important, what someone is gonna be using later. And then for even a small project, you have so many different design decisions. And maybe it's gonna get better into defining the small components on itself, because, for instance, to draw the chords on Matplotlib, it put 5 chords on the ukulele, so it, it doesn't even know what a uke is. But it's gonna keep improving. But defining the key pieces and how they fit together, that's always someone that's gonna define that. So I don't think programmers are gonna get out of job. We're gonna get better tools. We're gonna be more efficient with building stuff. But the need for thinking a solution, what data needs to be collected, where are the errors and pitfalls, and deploying, it's always gonna be there. So it's just we're just gonna become more efficient, and I think that's very clear in terms that 20 years ago you need a whole team of people to build one simple website.
Right.
And now it's something one engineer can do in 1 hour. That would have been very concerning to people in the 2000s, because they would have thought that they're going to get out of job. No, they're having more power. They can do more stuff and more fun stuff at the end.
Right. I highly agree with that. And it's kind of like I think it also kind of helps us to embrace and also look at things at a broader picture. Before you were also mentioning about like how documentation really helps in you understanding the code that you're writing, and also how it could help tell AI what you want in the code, and then it'll suggest the code there. It also helps with like thinking in terms of designing, as you mentioned, kind of like the design principles, and kind of like the overlay overview of the app that you want to build, or the program or the workflow that you want to build, and kind of like how this specific jigsaw puzzle fits into the bigger picture. And also it also helps with like when you're prompting like, okay, what's the practical usage of this, or what's the use case of this. It also helps broaden the horizon of the code that you're creating, and also like what business impact that it delivers, aside from maybe you came up with like you wanted to solve one specific problem, and then you ask AI, okay, what does that problem imply, and what does it what other related problems that it could potentially solve. And then with having large language model provide such like starting points for you to then build up upon. It also helps you to evolve the project even more, and as you mentioned, like about all of the possibilities that they have, which kind of makes me think of that movie, The Interstellar, where there's like multiple dimensionings
Yeah,
happening at the same time, and with those possibilities, then you could decide on like what's the next kind of like turning point or the branch that you want to go towards, and yeah, it also helps us evolve as a programmer, as a coder, as a builder. And I believe a builder would be a more suitable way of envisioning this, because aside from building coding, there's also the design aspect, and also the like when we're building something that people want to we're essentially like solving problems, and like building involves many teams, as you mentioned. Also, like there's a coder, there's a marketer, there's a strategist, and fitting all of those into one person, and then AI augmenting your ability
yeah,
to do so. I mean, that's like um, empowering.
yeah. And I think it's sort of a natural trend in terms of abstraction and things that you can do with the computer. So
Mhm.
if you think just right at the beginning, computer scientists were pretty much moving one and zeros just with a
Mhm.
chisel and a hammer on the memory, and we moved to Fortran, C++, and we're adding layers and layers and layers of abstraction. And if you uh, talk to one early computer scientist, uh, he found that the value was on working on the memory, because that's what he really knew about. And that's not something I care about, because I want to do practical things. I
Mhm.
want to build stuff, and for me all these tools help me in that regard. And I think we have to, as you mentioned, embrace that we can do more stuff, and sort of you have to let go some details, some control on some stuff, because if you want, you can always go back and build things by hand
Mhm.
as low as you want, but you can move uh, upon the different layers, and the higher you go, the more meta, the more sort of design and abstraction and conceptual you can define things. And I think that's very interesting. That's
Mhm.
something that we're gonna keep seeing as this all these tools evolve.
Right.
Sort of, I'm not as concerned on how LLMs affect coding
Mhm.
as much as I'm concerned of how this Gen AI tool affect books, movies, and artists in
Mhm.
general, because I think their legislation were not so ready, and it's just matter of see how Amazon has been popped up with so many books written by
Mhm.
AI, which
Mhm.
are not yet to the level where
Mhm.
we can enjoy. It still feels so fake, or
Right.
not so good in quality.
Mhm.
Maybe we'll get there, but it's uh, it's interesting to see that I there's an immediate gain in coding where we see this virtuous cycle,
Mhm.
whereas in other aspects we're not building that same cycle. It's sort of even breaking, because
Mhm.
when you output so many content of low quality,
Mhm.
training a better model gets harder, right?
Mhm. Right.
Whereas in coding, as you can test if it's good or not, there's no middle ground,
Mhm.
no gray area. So if a code works, it
Mhm.
compiles or
Mhm.
it breaks. So there, the virtuous cycle, it's easier to uh, make sure to
Mhm.
happen.
Right. 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 Yeah, I certainly agree, and also kind of like I think we still have a long way to go before AI could think like a human being, and like make decisions on their own. But there are also like like ethical issues involved with AI as well. I believe there's like there's a whole rabbit hole to explore more into that frontier. But generally, if we're like looking at the positive side, AI, Gen AI, I mean, there's a lot to gain from that. Um, and yeah, I believe I also become a better coder as a result of using AI tools.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's surprising when you're completing a task
Mhm.
and you get a suggestion of a
Mhm.
code that uses a function or something you
Mhm.
did not knew about, and
Right.
it works, and
Mhm.
it's like, hey, that's cool. I didn't
Right.
knew I could use this. It's like
Mhm.
you're coding with someone, or it
Mhm.
feels like very
Right.
close to pair programming.
Right. It's kind of like having a senior mentor,
Yeah,
like refactoring your code and kind of like seeing how you could make this in a more concise way. But then, when I refactor code using AI, I mean, when it works, it's good, right? And it consumes fewer lines of code. However, when looking back into the code, I find it more difficult to understand than if it were to be more lengthy. Let's say that a
yeah.
5 lines of code would be easier for me to understand than a single line of code that performs the exact same thing, but then is using several, built-in functions and several apply methods or in a more extended way. What are your take on that?
Yeah, I think that computer time is cheap
Mm-hmm.
and me time is very expensive.
Uh-huh.
So I try to program so I know how it works and I can improve it
Mm-hmm.
faster than just trying to come up with a clever
Mm-hmm.
one-liner that always confuse me, and I'm gonna end up revisiting that line several times.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's I'm not so concerned of having many lines of my code. If it's
Mm-hmm.
clear, I'm happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not in the sort of business of high performance computing. So
Mm-hmm.
shaving a couple of seconds in a
Mm-hmm.
script, it's not so important
Mm-hmm.
for the kind of job I have.
Mhm. That's a great way of putting it. And yeah, so aside from like exploring AI and using for your Pythonic workflows, what other aspects would you recommend? Let's say a novice or someone exploring Python as a student. What other topics aside from like using tools like AI that you would recommend?
Um, I I'm always fond of having side projects. I think side projects are very useful for landing an internship or a new job. If you can have something that you're really passionate and you can
Mhm.
spend time building and you're having fun,
Mhm.
that's something that's gonna pay off, many times in the future. So find that thing that you're very passionate about and just code a little project around that. If you want to analyze data from soccer or just astronomy or whatever you find interesting enough, I think that's the better way of learning a programming language. Doing hello world
Mhm.
examples, it's boring and you're not going to learn from it.
Mhm.
It's sort of some of the same approach I
Mhm.
give for people that want to become better speakers.
Mhm.
Find something you really care about, uh, propose a talk 3 6 months in ahead of
Mhm.
time, and you'll have a strong motivation to build a
Mhm.
good talk and to give something back to the community. And you don't have to be an expert on
Mhm.
anything to give a talk, even if a fresh comer, someone
Mhm.
that's just learning.
Mhm.
If you share the pitfalls, the things that confuse you, the things that are hard to understand, that's going to be very refreshing, and it's going to help people that are experts and cannot see that because they are so expert that they don't see the
Mhm.
difficulty of getting into a new field. So I would say uh, it's like if you want to run a marathon,
Mhm.
don't train and
Mm.
hope to be ready. Just pay for the damn marathon and you'll train. I'm pretty sure of that.
Right. Yeah, I really like that advice, and it kind of reminds me, like like when when I attended one of this talk a few years back when I was in academia, a Nobel laureate mentioned about like how he wanted to learn something new, so he wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
So before even starting the book, he had no idea about that particular field. I believe it was in the field of NMR spectroscopy, and then that actually I think kind of led to him, getting the Nobel Prize in that area. And it's kind of like, having fresh perspective in a new field
Mhm.
um, helps with, like figuring out something new. Sorry, something new that other people in that field for a long time might have overlooked.
Yeah.
It's kind of like having fresh eyes in a specific area.
And I think there's a great quote
Mhm,
that says something like, "We overestimate what we can do in a
mhm,
day, and we underestimate what we can do in a year."
mhm,
So go for the long run and keep learning.
mhm.
It's all that,
Right.
just that.
Cool. And you mentioned about like finding something that you're passionate about, learning, and then building projects about that. And you also mentioned about how you're building up this app for playing and learning ukulele. So it doesn't have to be overly complicated topics, right? You could just pick something from your life that you
Yeah.
think, will, I mean, the app that you're building or the project that you're building will solve, and then just
Yeah,
build
I
it.
mean, I think Python is really great to automatize things and simplify things. So if you hate building a list of things to buy in the supermarket and you want to do something about it, that's a great project. I mean, it can be something you're passionate about or something you hate, but something that really moves you. And there can be uh, lots of ideas there. I mean, I'm pretty sure we all hate and love several things in our
Mhm,
lives.
mhm. Awesome. Right. Yeah. So aside from building and like productive tools, what would be your other advice? Let's say for learning a new language. Let's say if they're deciding between should they learn JavaScript or Python. Um, yeah, what would your advice be?
I think the language that you end up choosing for learning depends on your community and the sort of job you do. For statisticians, R is like the one of the most popular choices, and I think that's great because if it's something that it's used and you can uh, share and it validates your results and it's the tool you need to use. So it depends on sort of the community that you're working with. For me, Python works great because you can do anything. I mean, I have my computer science code and I can
Mhm,
put it on a web app and I can deploy it and I can create a book and a PDF. And it might be not the first choice on all the different domains,
mhm,
but it's a good second choice. So it
mhm,
pretty
mhm,
much you can use it for anything. And I think having libraries that can help you do anything, it's sort of the magic in Python.
mhm,
So I would say it's a very strong competitor to do anything.
mhm,
But if in your particular industry there's a default language, just learn that.
mhm,
Uh, I mean, switching from first programming language to a second or a third, it becomes easier. But
mhm.
you just have to start learning, and you can always change mid-course if
Right.
language is not the best or
Mhm.
you find a better opportunity learning something else. That's also very possible.
Right. Yeah. I also encountered a lot of similar questions around this from YouTube videos that I've published. People asking like, okay, what language should they do? I mean, there's a lot of awesome languages that they could potentially learn, right? Like Rust or like, and also other up and coming languages. But it's kind of like as you mentioned, like are they equipped with libraries that will help you get stuff done quicker? If
Mhm.
it does, then it also saves you a lot of time of having to reinvent the wheel and creating the same function. Um, Whereas you could just import and use that function in a few lines, which they are already in existence, instead of having to write out your own function, think of the logic as well.
Yeah, and programming languages are, sort of also cyclical, and they can rise and fall quickly. I heard that Ruby is
Mhm.
coming back because
Oh, okay.
programming with Ruby now with AI, it's
Mhm.
very easy, and
Mhm.
it's a very expressive
Mhm.
language. And
Right.
you know, you we don't know the future, what programming is gonna
Mhm.
be top in 10 or 20 years.
Mhm.
Uh, and again, the advice is, keep learning and you'll be fine, as long as you can adapt to whatever is needed.
Mhm. Nice. Yep. It kind of reminds me of Steve Jobs mentioning about like learning, being foolish, staying
Yeah.
hungry, and when you're enjoying something and when you're hungry to learn more, it comes naturally. So you don't need any external motivation factor. So the motivation is actually like intrinsic, coming from within, and that helps you to with that curious mindset. You kind of want to learn and ingest a lot of information as you go along.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Yeah. Yes. Thanks a lot for sharing your amazing tips, advice, in how you learn Python and how you're using Python in your day to day. Is there any final words that you want to mention before we end the show? Maybe how we could, the audience could reach out to you as well.
Yeah, for me, it has also been a great talk. So thanks for your time and all the questions. You can find me on pretty much all the networks as Sebastiandres, and I'll be happy to talk to anyone that has a question or just want to chat a little bit.
Right. Awesome. Yeah. So links up to the social platforms will be provided in the video description. So thank you so much again, Sebastian, for joining the show.
Thanks, Janine. See you around.